Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to do my full review of the new Canon 16-35mm f2.8L Mark III USM lens. This is arguably one of Canon's most important lenses when it comes to doing any kind of professional work as either a journalist or covering events or weddings or even shooting portraits. Often the most commonly used professional lenses tend to be the f2.8 zooms, including the 16-35mm, the 24-70, and the 70-200mm. Between these three lenses, often referred to as, Canon's trinity of zooms, a lot of the work gets done. And I myself, while I love to shoot with prime lenses, a lot of times when I'm shooting an event, I do revert to using the wide aperture zoom lenses because they offer so much versatility, and that's something that's very valuable. So this is, I believe, perhaps Canon's most important lens release of the year outside of the upcoming, though slightly delayed, 24-105 f4L Mark II. This is a lens that eventually will probably end up in a lot of photographers' kits over time. And so I want to do my best to do it justice and to be fair in pointing out both its strengths, which there are many of them, and its weaknesses, and there are a few of those. And so I'm going to do this review in two separate parts. In the first review, we're going to look at the overall design of the lens. We'll examine things like its minimum focus distance, its operation, its autofocus performance, all of those things broken down. And then in the second half of the review, we'll look at the overall image quality as well as look at my conclusions on the lens itself. So stay tuned. The second part will come about 1 week after the first part, and so we'll look at both of those things together. So let's jump in together and let's look at the overall build and handling and also design of this very important lens. And so if you have shot with either the Mark II of this lens or with the, even more so with the 16-35 f4L IS, you have a pretty good idea of the overall general shape of the lens. The lens is designed in a fairly similar fashion to the 16-35 f4L. One difference is that there's obviously more of a flare at the front of the barrel to accommodate a larger 82mm front filter thread. And because a few of you have asked, that front filter thread is plastic. As far as I can tell, it is not metal. And however, most of the body itself is externally, it's engineered plastics over a metal frame. Pretty much standard for Canon L series lenses. You can certainly tell that it's a nicely constructed lens, and it feels, heavy-ish, but not with that same kind of density as the lenses like Zeiss lenses with their all-metal construction that have just that unique feel of heft and density to it. Now, this lens is on the heavier side when it comes to the 16-35mm variants. It comes in at 790 grams or right under 28 ounces. That compares to the previous generation that was 635 grams. And so it has it's gained a fair bit of weight, about 20% over the previous generation. And of course, it outweighs the lighter f4 variant that is 615 grams by an even larger amount. And so it's certainly noticeably heftier than those lenses. However, at 790 grams, it still balances quite nicely on a camera body. You're going to be shooting this most likely on a full-frame camera. And so it balances nicely there, and it's not onerous in that sense. And it certainly undercuts the lens I've been shooting for wide angle, which is the Tamron 15-30 VC, also an f2.8 lens, and it is noticeably heavier. It weighs in at about 1,100 grams, and so it's quite a bit heavier. I noted when I did the unboxing video that I was excited about the potential of this lens having a sharp f2.8 zoom lens and a smaller package. And certainly this lens is smaller. It's narrower around in girth than what the Tamron is, and as we've just noted, it is lighter. The Tamron has because it has a curved front element, it has a fixed lens hood that's not removable. And so with the lens hood attached, the Canon is actually the longer lens, and with the lens hood off, it's a little bit shorter than the Tamron. The bottom line is that while the weight certainly adds up, and so if you're counting ounces and you want as little weight as possible, the new 16 to 35 L Mark III is the lighter of the two lenses. But if your bigger concern is about storage in your bag or taking up space, while the new Canon is a little bit smaller, it's not functionally smaller in the sense it's not really going to take up any less room in a camera bag. All three of the 16 to 35 variants, Mark II, f4L, and then this new Mark III, all of them have the exact same minimum focus distance, and that is 0.28 of a meter, and in feet or inches, that is 11.02 inches. So they all have the same minimum focus distance. They all have the same stated focal length, but there is a variation in the magnification. The Mark II of this lens had a 0.22 times magnification. The f4L has a 0.23 times magnification, while this new lens moves up to a class-leading 0.25 times magnification, or a 1:4 life-size ratio. So that, of course, becomes a very handy thing, you know, to be able to have that kind of magnification. It just gives you more flexibility in how close you can get. And storytelling type images where you want to, you know, focus close on a small object while include a bigger frame, which is what a wider angle allows you to do like that. And so how do you explain the same minimum focus distance and but different maximum magnifications? I would have to say my only conclusion is that I think there is some slight variance in the actual real focal length of these lenses. And so I would say that this lens possibly is actually even exceeding 35 millimeters on the long end, which is a good sign. You're getting a little bit longer focal range than what you might expect, and that handily beats the 0.20 times magnification of the Tamron, which of course has a shorter maximum focal length of only 30 millimeters. The trade-off with the Tamron, of course, is that it goes a bit wider, 15 millimeters on the wide end. And yes, when I compared them in a number of different situations, both at closer focus distances and infinity, the Tamron is noticeably wider than this Canon lens. And so which of those is more preferable, the longer focal length on the long end or the wider focal length on the wide end? That really comes down to your shooting preferences. And so anyway, but something to take into consideration when it comes to all of that. Another interesting thing is that when you compare all three of the 16 to 35 variants, is that while all of them have the same amount of elements, that's 16 elements, the other two lenses, the f4L and the Mark II, they have 12 groups that those elements are arranged in. And surprisingly, in that I very rarely see a less complicated optical formula. While the new lens still has 16 elements, it's actually in 11 groups instead of 12. But the positive of that, of course, is that, as we're going to see in a moment, whatever they did in optimizing this optical formula, it certainly did the trick. This is a vastly improved optical performer here. One thing I will note before moving on from the build, however, is that this lens has much more advanced weather sealing over the previous generation, and so there's a rear gasket. There's also a number of internal seals that are included on the lens. And so while Canon does recommend putting on a front protection filter, and you certainly will see when you zoom that there is some movement in and out where you could, you know, suck some, mostly I think about you could suck some dust into the lens. So putting that front filter on there will help to complete the seal. But Canon's language is very enthusiastic about the weather sealing, and so they use a term like supremely moisture and dust resistance when you add that filter to the front. And so this is a very well sealed lens, which is great because wide-angle lenses in particular are often used in a landscape type scenario, which means that they are going to be exposed to the elements quite often. The Canon didn't disappoint when it comes to the autofocus, and these days I really think that this is the area that first-party lenses have the greatest advantage. These days, third-party options are often very, very close optically and in their feature set, but the autofocus tends to be the best in the first-party lenses. And I certainly found that to be the case here. I was able to calibrate it very quickly, no fuss, It autofocused very accurately for me, and I did a controlled test where I wanted repeatability, and so I set up on a tripod, I defocused the lens, I used a 2-second delay, but I just focused until it beeped, clicked the shutter, allowed it to take the shot, and repeated that 10 times. And the goal there is to have complete repeatability, and that was the case with this lens. Every single time, focus was perfect on the lens, and you can move from frame to frame, and there's almost no variance at all from exposure to exposure. That is great news. You want this kind of lens, particularly if you're going to be shooting it for events and photojournalism. You want it to have very repeatable results, and that's what it delivers. The autofocus is quick, it's quiet, and it's accurate, and so it does everything that you would want of it. If you're interested in the comparison, I shot the Tamron in the exact same conditions, and while the Tamron did very well, there was one of the 10 frames where there was some variance in the focus. It was just a little bit off, and so not quite as repeatable as the Canon. In terms of focus speed, I couldn't really tell a difference shooting them side by side. They focused about with the same speed and about the same level of noise, but I would give the overall accuracy edge to the Canon. And of course, with a first-party product, you don't have to deal with any issues. Like when I got the 5D Mark IV, the 15-30 Tamron, it wouldn't live view properly. Live view, if you started live view, it immediately shut back down. So I had to send the lens in for a firmware update, and it's fine after that. But that's just the kind of little annoyance that you don't have to deal with a first-party lens. As you can see, Canon has produced another well-designed, well-executed lens that just has a little bit more polish than a lot of the third-party lenses that I use. And it's just well-executed throughout, and while it's not a perfect lens when it comes to the overall build and handling, it's a well-designed and well-executed lens. Of course, stay tuned for the second part of the review, in which we'll look at the overall image quality, and I'll give you my final verdict on whether or not I feel like it's a worthy upgrade, and of course, whether I think it's worth the money. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you'll look down below, you'll see a link to my ongoing image gallery of images I'm taking during my review period. Also, there's a link there if you would like to do some shopping for the lens. And you can follow me on social media as well. If you haven't already, please subscribe. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.